Ciao amici, welcome to my kitchen for another great episode. Today we're going to be focusing on pizza. Pizza specifically at home using all of the equipment that you already have in your kitchen. So let's get started with dough. The first thing that I'm going to suggest is that you find yourself a flour that's been what's called malted. Malt derives from the barley family, and it's got some enzymatic properties as well as some coloring agents. So what is going to happen because of the malt, when you bake inside of your oven, your pizza crust is going to be really nice and golden brown and not that classic white pizza that you probably already have with the burnt cheese on top. This is going to give you a really awesome dough, and I'm going to show you a couple tricks along the way. The flour that I'm using is from a company called King Arthur. This is a great flour because number one, it is malted, but number two, it's kind of a mid-weight flour. It's not really heavy, not really light. They actually call it out on the bag. It's 11.7% protein. I've used this flour for everything from a New York classic pizza dough to a Chicago style pizza dough and even Neapolitan style dough. The great thing is that if you're baking at home, try to find yourself some kind of flour with malt, or if you're going to go and search for malt, malt comes dry, and you would look for non-diastatic malt. Non-diastatic malt is going to give us the coloring properties, so we got that nice brown color and not having to worry about the other effects that it does to the dough. So let's get started. I'm going to give you all of these measurements today in volumetric measurements, and I'm kind of cringing hearing myself say it, but for all of you at home, I've had a lot of people on the Spizzirri.com website send us a lot of questions about baking specifically in your home kitchen. And the reason why I'm choosing to do it this method is because I think this is going to give you a really easy way to make this dough. And then I hope that I can encourage you to go and get yourself a digital scale. This digital scale is actually really cool because it gives us a really fine gram scale that'll go to really, really low measurements. And then it also gives us a larger scale, which will go to really high measurements. So this will give us the best of both worlds. You can go on Amazon, find yourself one of these, maybe for 40, 50 bucks. Very easy, something that's going to be around for a very, very long time. This one runs on batteries as well as has a power cord. So very easy and simple to do. Now, as I go through these, I'm going to give you all of the ingredients by volume measurements. So what I mean is by cups and tablespoons and teaspoons and all that great stuff. But then if you check on the screen, we're also going to give you these ingredients in metric as well. So you'll see them by grams, and you also find those in the description. Let's talk about the rest of the ingredients. I've got water here. Water is going to be used, we're using water right out of the tap here in Chicago, and this is going to be water that's kind of at room temperature. I've got instant dry yeast. You can also use active dry yeast. If you can't find instant dry yeast, when you go to the grocery store, look for specifically Red Star quick rise yeast, and that'll be the same as we have in here. I've got some beautiful extra virgin olive oil, nice and peppery. It's going to give us some, our dough, this ability to stretch, right, without breaking, but it's also going to give us that beautiful flavor. It's also going to give us a little bit of maybe a softer texture to our dough as well, not very heavy. The flour I have is the King Arthur, and then I'm using some regular sugar, granulated sugar, as well as fine sea salt. Fine sea salt you can find anywhere at the grocery store. Try to find yourself the most Italian one that you can. I'm using a different sea salt that actually I found in the grocery store aisle, but you've heard me probably refer to using fine sea salt from Sicily, an area called Trapani. It was one of my favorites that I use. All of my stuff is measured out here. So what I'm going to do is let's get started. Now, I've already got in my bowl, I've got 500 grams of all-purpose flour. 500 grams equates to 4 cups. Now, if you're going to weigh 4 cups of flour, I use a 1 cup measuring cup. What I would do is go into the flour, get a nice big mound. I'm not packing this in. And then once you have a nice big mound of flour, I use a scraper like this, and then just scrape the additional off the top and then dump into my bowl. It's that simple. You shouldn't be using the method as if you were making one of those Italian espresso pots of coffee in the morning where we keep adding and packing and adding and packing into the cup. That's not what we want to do. We want to just take a nice scoop of flour, let it be mounded up, and then swipe the rest into the bag and then dump, and that'll be our 1 cup measurement. Now, let's go forward. Now to this empty bowl, what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna take my water. This is 1 1/4 cups of water at room temperature. Keep in mind, the faster you want this dough to go, the warmer you're gonna have this water. My grandmother used to use her water, we say tepid water. What the heck is tepid? It's kind of warm where you feel it on the edge of your skin, right? Maybe somewhere about 90 to 95 degrees, even 100 degrees. But we want to keep the temperature of our water under 110 because what happens after we exceed 110 degrees, it does some really funky stuff to our yeast. I'm going to be making this dough today, and I'm going to show you how to utilize it 1 day from now. So we're going to make our dough today, put it into the refrigerator, and then use it tomorrow. So I'm going to talk about that later today. So what I have here is 1 1/4 cups of water. I'm going to take this and I'm going to stick it inside of my bowl. Now, to this bowl, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take my yeast. In here, this is 1 teaspoon of instant yeast, which if you can't find the jar of instant yeast at the grocery store, go ahead and get yourself the packets of quick rise yeast. I'm going to take this and I'm going to sprinkle this onto the top of the water. What we're doing here is we're giving this yeast a chance to kind of get into the water and get into the game. Now, when we do this, you don't necessarily have to use instant yeast inside of the water. We can easily add this inside of our flour, give everything a nice mix, and it'll do just fine for us, okay? What's gonna happen though, by putting this into the bowl, it's gonna start to slowly dissolve the yeast that's in here. Now, my grandma said the yeast needs food, right? So we have to feed our yeast. The reason I'm using sugar is not to feed the yeast. What I'm doing is I want to make sure that I've got a little extra sugar inside of that dough to give us, again, this really nice, beautiful crust that's really golden brown and it looks like it's well baked. So I'm going to take my sugar and I'm going to sprinkle this in as well. Now, inside over here, my sugar here is 2 teaspoons of just regular granulated sugar. So now that I've got everything inside this bowl, we've got 2 ingredients that are left here, and I'm going to show you how we use these, okay? I've got olive oil and I've got my sea salt. I'm going to place them right here. I don't need my measuring spoons because we know how to measure with the measuring spoon. Now, I'm going to make some room here as well. I'm going to take my fingers, okay, and I'm going to dip my fingers inside over here, and I'm going to agitate the yeast and sugar until they're fully dissolved inside of this. Now, inside of this bowl, this could be something that happens really quickly. We're not looking for the yeast to start foaming up. I know my grandma used to have a cup of warm water on the counter. She would add the yeast into that cup with the sugar, and then she'd wait about 10 minutes, and it looked really foamy, and then she would add it in. We're not using that method. We're going to be going pretty quick now, all right? Now, to this, I've got my flour. My flour, again, those 4 cups are measured out. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to get maybe about a couple cups worth or half of the amount of this flour inside of my water. And what I'm going to do is with my fingers, I'm kind of reaching down like I'm making a claw and reaching down sideways. And I'm going to just kind of go into a circle here. I'm trying to create a batter. And this batter is going to separate the yeast and the salt. Right? This is something that my grandmother would say all the time, like, oh, we never want to mix the yeast and salt together because the salt will kill the yeast. I'm doing this just to create a batter and we don't have to worry about the yeast and the salt interfering with each other. Now that I've got this kind of mixed in, I kind of see a little bit of flour, not that much really. What I'm going to do next, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add my olive oil in here. This particular dough that I'm making today, you'll be able to use to make both a round pizza that you're gonna bake either on a pizza stone or maybe on your barbecue grill, a lot of different ways you can use this, or you can press this dough into a sheet pan and make a beautiful pan pizza. We call this style in a sheet pan grandma style because this is most of our grandmothers or our mothers, especially if you grew up in an Italian household, this is the way they would have made this. What I'm trying to do is make sure that that oil is very homogeneous. I don't want to see streaks of oil at this point. Once I have the oil inside over there, you can see that with just a little bit of work, this is turning into now like this beautiful like cream or that batter I mentioned. At this point, next what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my salt, I'm going to add it inside, and I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm just going to keep stirring this around until I don't see that salt anymore. This is the basis for our dough, okay? And once you get to this point, it's really hard to screw this up at this point, okay? Now, I have the rest of my flour here. I've got a dirty hand and a clean hand. This is on purpose, right? So what I'm gonna do is, I'm gonna hold this over, I'm gonna put maybe about a half of the amount of flour into the bowl, and I'm gonna continue to stir this. This is gonna start to get thicker and thicker, and that water is gonna absorb into the flour. That paste that we created is gonna grab onto that flour, and you're gonna start to see that this is gonna start to get thicker and thicker as I continue to stir this. I'm gonna continue moving this around, and little by little, I can notice that there's really not any more flour, very little flour left over on the bottom. I'm using my index finger to kind of scrape the side of the bowl, but you can also get yourself a fancy dough scraper like this to help you kind of get underneath and loosen everything up. We're gonna use this at the end. Now, as I'm doing this, I can feel that this is coming together very nicely. I'm gonna take the last part of my flour, pour this all in, and I'm done. I'm gonna put this on the side. At this point now, we notice we haven't started kneading yet. All I'm doing is just kind of moving this ball of dough that we're creating. I'm kind of moving it around, and I'm allowing the dough to pick up the flour. I'm working on this kind of tablecloth. It's not, this is a kitchen towel, but this is, we use this for a drying rack for our dishes. I use this underneath my cutting board so that it doesn't slide around. I'm using this today just so that underneath here I've got some surface so that the bowl's not banging around on top of my counter. If at your house you've got wood countertops, if you've got wood cutting boards, something like that, and you're not worried about it, do whatever you feel, but this is the reason why I'm using this here underneath. And again, as I'm stirring this around, this dough is, I got a little bit on me too. This dough is picking up the last bit of this flour. I'm going to continue just pushing this around and squeezing with my fingers until all the flour is gone. And then I'm going to take this out of the bowl and I'm going to show you how to finish kneading this right on top of the counter. This shouldn't take you very long. My grandma would do this within 10-12 minutes. She was so quick doing this. I'm doing this a little bit slower so that I can demonstrate the technique. And if you're following along with me, or if you're going to replay this later, again, take note at the time it's taking. This isn't really a lot of science or art at this point. This is really just trying to get this flour into the dough that we're creating. And I'm nearly there. We're almost there. Okay. Now, all of my flour now is inside of my dough. I've got this dough scraper right here, or this bowl scraper. This is also really good so that if your dough is stuck to your hands, just kind of scrape everything off, right? Our dough is complete. My bowl is practically clean. There's really nothing left. Just a little bit of flour that was stuck to the outside, but you'll notice that my dough really isn't sticking to my hands anymore. What I'm going to do is now I'm going to remove all this stuff and I'm going to go directly onto my counter. Okay, so I've turned my dough out onto the counter from the bowl. There's a couple things that if you don't already have them, you might want to put them on your wish list for baking. Again, we've got a bowl scraper. This is nice to get around to clean the edges of your bowl. And then we also have what's called a bench scraper. Bench scraper is used to scrape the surface of your worktop. In this case, I like to use a bench scraper because if my dough is sticking to the counter, this will help me release it really nice and easily. You can see the dough is just a little bit sticky, but you have to remember that because the water just physically went into the flour needs some time for that water to absorb. Don't get caught into the thing of you wanting to say, I need extra flour on my work surface because the dough is too sticky. I'm going to promise you, trust my recipe, and you're going to have really great results. Don't add any more flour. Everything you need is already in the dough now. Now, when I teach little kids how to make dough, I always use this example of an airplane taking off on the runway. And I tell little kids, how does an airplane take off? And they, with their hands, they go like this, zoom, right? And the dough is going to be in the same motion as an airplane taking off. When we use our hands, I want you to use the palms of your hands and not so much your fingers. Your fingers are going to be used to lift the dough towards you, but then, just like the airplane taking off, I'm going to push forward and roll back. And as I continue to do this a few times, you'll notice that this is becoming the shape of like a burrito. Once you have this, I'm going to have you turn it the opposite way. So now I have a seam that's sitting on top of me, and then my fingers again are going to be back here, and I'm going to start to work back and forth with my hands, just rolling and kneading, rolling and kneading. And it's this simple. We're going to do this now for probably about 4 or 5 minutes until that dough gets really nice and smooth, which I can feel already that it's already happening under my hands. Don't worry about those maybe you find some little bits of dough or flour that haven't been completely dissolved yet. Those will all dissolve, no problem at all. And again, just with a little work like this, I can see how nice and smooth that my dough is becoming. I don't really see any of those little balls of dried flour or anything, little bits dried up inside over here. And I'm going to continue working like this, just very quickly. You can see already the surface, how nice and smooth this is starting to become. This is exactly the point that I want to get to. I'm going to give this a couple more rounds where I'm just going to kind of knead all the way to the back of the dough here. And then once I get to there, I'm going to turn it sideways and do this one more time the opposite way. Now, as I come around, if I take my dough and allow these 2 points to fold inside, this top is going to get really nice and tight. It's going to form a really nice tight skin here. If I do the same thing with this point, these 2 points, kind of fold them in and pinch them from the bottom, this is going to do the same thing. This is going to be with technique that we use when we make our dough ball. And all I'm doing is I'm just kind of pushing from the outside to the middle and then tucking those middle in, and it's creating this really nice, smooth surface. Don't worry at this point if it starts to tear a little bit, because we're now going to let this dough rest. We just gave it a lot of work. We abused it a little bit. All that gluten is starting to tighten up on the inside. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this little ball of dough. I'm going to take my bowl that had my water in it originally. I'm not too worried about the bowl being dirty at this point. Inside the bowl that my olive oil was in, there's always a little bit of oil left at the end. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and kind of on my fingers, use this on the exterior of the dough. And this is going to help keep this dough from drying out. And I'm just going to kind of go all the way around, pat this around just like this. And if you're worried about the dough sticking, which I'm not going to be worried about it, but now you can take this really oiled surface, flip it upside down, and kind of press a little bit of that oil into the bottom of the bowl. And again, turn it on top just like this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cover this with some plastic wrap. I'm going to put it on the side to rest for about 15 minutes. And then we're going to come back and I'm going to knead it one more time and show you how to finish this dough. Stick around. Now that my dough has rested for about 15 minutes with the plastic wrap on it, I'm ready to move to the next step. All I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the plastic, and then under here I could already feel that Mother Nature has done most of the kneading for me. You notice that I barely kneaded this dough. It was really just coming together with my fingers. I went around, I kneaded it a little bit, and then we let it rest. In the resting stage, this is a very critical point for the dough because that process of the water absorbing into the flour is actually acting as a kneading step. If I was to take this dough right now, I can actually start to pull on this, and you'll notice that the gluten has started to develop already. And we haven't even finished kneading. I'm going to knead this one more time, but this is just with 15 minutes of rest. And you can see how beautiful and elastic this dough has already become. Because I put that little bit of olive oil on the dough and in the bowl, you'll also see that it removed very easily and it's not sticking to my hands at all. And we're going to actually finish by kneading this just a few more times. This is the last step. Again, I'm using that push and roll method. I'm going to turn this as soon as I see it forms this little baby burrito. And I'm going to turn this the opposite way, and I'm going to knead this just until the point where I feel that the dough skin on the exterior is ready to rip. I can look at this already and see all those beautiful little fine air bubbles that have already been created in here. Now I'm going to again just give this a quick knead the other way, and then this is ready for us to divide. If I take this again, pull the outside edges towards the middle and pinch them closed, this outside exterior skin is going to be formed really nice and tight. And the whole idea is that as we form this really nice tight skin, all of those air bubbles that are beginning to be created from our yeast are going to get trapped inside of here. And then when we go and we bake our pizzas with this dough, you're going to have this beautiful, super light and airy crust. I love this dough so much, and I know you're going to love it too. At this point, I'm going to show you a couple things here. If we were to take and say we're going to make just round pizzas, right? And we're not going to be putting this into a pan, I would cut this down the middle and then take those two halves and cut them one more time on each side. This will give us maybe a 9 or 10 inch pizza, really nice 9 or 10 inch pizza. If you wanted some larger pizzas, maybe a 10 or 11 inch pizza, you can divide this into 3 equal pieces, all right? So each ball is a little bit heavier. Now, I'm going to also be showing you in a future video how to bake this inside of a pan as well, this exact same dough. In that case, I'm just going to divide this down the middle, and now I've got 2 even halves, okay? Each of these halves will make a beautiful about 9 by 13 pan that we'll be able to push this dough out into. Wait till it pushes all the way to the outside of the pan, and it's going to be beautiful and super airy. So now what I'm going to do, let's do both methods. I'm going to take my bench scraper, and this is really good for cutting. So what I'm going to do is I'll make 3 dough balls, okay? I'm going to cut this one time down the middle, and that one time down the middle will give me these halves, kind of even. I'm going to use this half for a pan pizza, and then I'm going to cut these 2 in half, and these will be for my round pizzas. If we take these edges now, the part that was the center of the dough ball, if I take these edges and kind of roll them into the middle, and then take these edges and roll them into the middle, this is going to start to give me a nice smooth exterior. Don't worry if this isn't super smooth or elastic at this point. This is going to be something that you're going to get better and better at when you make dough over and over and over again. I want to keep in mind though that if you're making a pan pizza, unless you're using a round pan, I'm going to tell you to try to make these balls into kind of like a cylinder, because your pan is kind of a rectangle, and it's much easier to take something that's the shape of the rectangle or oval and press it into a pan as compared to a round dough ball and press it into a square pan. So this is like this. I'm going to take this, I'm going to give this just one quick turn. I'm pushing the inside edges together, and there's my first dough ball. This is great. Now these little ones, what I'm going to do, I'm going to take these dough, I'm going to kind of stretch this into a square, and then I'm going to take the points, the opposite points, fold these into the middle, and then take these outside points, fold them into the middle. And then I see that now this exterior is really nice and smooth. I'm going to take the points again, pull them into the middle, take the points and pull them into the middle. And I'm going to continue doing that, kind of folding wherever I see a seam, almost like a change purse. I'm going to keep doing this until I have a nice round ball on top. That's simple. Now you'll notice that there is some difference in these sizes. As you start getting more advanced in your dough making and you start taking this more seriously, this is the point where I would have you say, we're going to get out our digital scale and we're physically going to weigh the dough, divide it into 4 even portions or 2 even portions, and they'll have a very consistent weight every single time. Now that my dough balls have been formed, I'm ready to get them ready for storage. What I'm going to do is I'm going to find containers that are closest in size to the shapes that we've created. For this one that I'm going to use for pan pizza, I've got a rectangular shaped container. All I'm going to do is I'm going to take the dough, stick it inside the middle of the container, and then I can take a little bit of olive oil, just a small little drop of olive oil. I can put this on the exterior of the dough. This is going to keep the exterior of the dough from creating a small skin that if when you stretch this dough and it has a skin, it's going to cause all these kind of unusual perforations or tears on your pizza crust, which I really don't like. And I hope that you learn to do this as well so that you don't get those weird perforations either. Now that my dough ball has some oil on it, I just take the lid and get this ready to put away. We're going to stick these in the refrigerator. Now, my small ones, I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to take a dough ball just like this. I've got a little bit of oil on my hand and just kind of go around very gently and stick this inside of my container. The most important part of this is to make sure that the container is locked with the lid so that no air can get inside. As long as we have no air inside of these containers, what we've done is kind of built almost like a proofing environment so that it's got some really nice warm air inside. There's no air getting into the container causing a skin. And then when we get these out tomorrow, the dough balls will be really nice and spread open. And they might even see the edges of the container, and it'll be really easy for us to remove them. So these are going to go into my refrigerator overnight. My suggestion is to make sure you put them in for at least 12 to 16 hours. And then if you have up to 24 hours, that's going to be even better as well. And then I'm going to show you in an upcoming video how to stretch this dough. I hope you all learned something today. If you haven't already subscribed to this YouTube channel, go ahead and hit that bell and subscribe. If you haven't shared this with all your friends and family, make sure they know about it as well. You can also visit all my social media channels by searching for me at Ask Chef Leo. I'm really happy we baked together today, and I look forward to seeing you all very soon. Ciao amici, ciao.